So welcome everybody. I'm going to be going back and forth, letting people on to the Zoom. So we have a lovely host tonight. Mrs. Yanni Collins is going to be moderating. And so I am going to stop talking and pass it right over to her. We've got a lot to get through tonight. Thank you. Oh, you're on mute, Yanni.
Of course I am. Thank you. We at Pose appreciate every panelist that is joining us here as a follow-up from the listening sessions in June in light of the continued progress towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. At the end of this meeting, we will read questions related to race and human rights fielded by the community to be answered by our panelists. To those watching at home, thank you for your continued support and participation. It is imperative that we continue to have transparency and utilize the power that each and every community member has. Now, to introduce our panelists in speaking order, we have State Rep Andy Vargas, Mayor Ferrantini, Reverend Kenneth Young, Captain Pistone, Councilwoman Melinda Barrett, Superintendent Margaret Murata Smith, Haverhill Public Schools Human Resources Coordinator Sandra MacArthur, Director of Multi-Tiered Systems of Support Diane Conley. As a reminder, we would like to hear from everyone within this hour-long session, so I will raise my hand at the 4-minute mark and thank you once your 5 minutes has expired. Okay, let's get started. State Rep Andy Vargas.
Sure. Good evening. Thank you, Yanni, for the introduction and for all the work that you've been doing with POSE. We appreciate the energy and enthusiasm that you're bringing to this work. And thank you, Kat and Dennis, for laying the groundwork for our youth and letting them step up and lead in these times. It's great to see everybody on this call. First and foremost, I just want to remind you all that it's important to take care of yourselves during this pandemic and during this crisis. We need all of you to be performing to the best of your abilities, and you can't do that if you're not taking care of yourselves. So the friendly reminder to make sure you take care of yourself, whether that's physical, mental, whatever you need, take the space that you need, because there's a lot of work to do, but we're very lucky to have the leadership that we have here in Haverhill that's committed to doing this work, but we need you to make sure that you're at your best of your abilities. I will just briefly talk about some of the updates at the state level and then make sure that we have enough time for everybody else. The last time that we had a forum, we talked about the police reform legislation that the state was working on. I'm happy to report that the legislation that has been passed by both the House and the Senate is still in conference committee, but the good news is that both chambers passed legislation that reflects the 4 core priorities of the Black and Latino caucus. And so that's clear use of force standards, creating an independent body to review police conduct and misconduct, creating a decertification process. Believe it or not, Massachusetts, again, was one of the few states that did not have a licensing system. So licensing system for police officers. So we're excited about that. And so we're hopeful that we're at the 1-yard line for that bill. The House and the Senate continue to negotiate the differences between the 2 bills. It doesn't take a brain surgeon to guess that the main difference or the main contention is on the issue of qualified immunity, which has taken up much of the discussion, which I think unfortunately has, because there are, I think, much more pressing issues that affect our community than that one issue. Secondly, on housing, an update on housing, the economic development bill that we passed in the House and the Senate passed as well is also in conference committee. Again, we feel it's at the 1-yard line. That economic development bill both has grants for minority-owned businesses, small businesses of all types of backgrounds as well, and also includes housing legislation that my office had filed to make it easier to build housing in communities that usually aren't housing friendly. So making sure that Haverhill isn't the only city that continues to produce housing, but also incentivizing housing in places that usually say no to housing, which, as we know, is a form of systemic racism. So, and then on the economic development, legislation. I think I mentioned that there's also grants that are going to be issued to small businesses. We were on a call with the governor and his team today about prioritizing that funding to businesses that perhaps weren't eligible for PPP funding from the federal government. And so we know that that was a lot of Black and brown businesses. So, but any business in the Haverhill community that is applying for those small business grants through the Mass Growth Capital Corporation, please let my office know, and we will flag your application for the Baker administration to make sure that they know. So those are my brief updates. Police reform, housing, Echo Dev, we're at the 1 yard line. There have been some great conversations happening thanks to the Haverhill Police Department and VIP with youth. Very grateful for that continued partnership, and just happy to be a part of this team of individuals who are so dedicated to equity in our community.
Awesome, thank you. At this time, we'll have Mayor Ferrantini.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to speak, Kat, and for all of you, for all that you do in the community, and for all of you working out in the community with POSE and with other groups. Thank you very, very much. I wanted to give you an update on a couple of things. We're very concerned in Haverhill about an upcoming, we hope not, but an upcoming avalanche of evictions. As all of you know, the eviction moratorium ended. One landlord alone that I talked to was delivering 17 notices to quit earlier this week or last week, and we're afraid of hundreds of people being evicted. There is no place for them to go. We have an inelastic housing system. No new housing is being built. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. That's a related but separate problem. The shelters are filled. It will be an absolute disaster if these folks are evicted. We've set up a program to help. I need all of your help in getting the word out about it. We've set up a program where tenants can apply for up to $5,000 in back rent. We can also use it for back utilities. Utilities aren't the crisis right now because the utility companies are not issuing shut-off notices. But they can apply for up to $5,000 in back rent. They need to either call 311, one call to City Hall 311, or go onto the city website, or call the Community Development Block Grant Office. Thus far, we've helped 90 families stave off evictions. We have another 90 applicants that we're working on. There are a couple of conditions. People have to show they were affected by COVID. People who haven't paid the rent in years aren't eligible. But people who were laid off, lost income, lost some wages. Maybe they were still working but didn't make as much. Maybe they had to stay home and take care of the children. Whatever the circumstance, we're there to help. We have to have the place inspected. We don't want people living in a unit that's substandard, but we'll work with the landlords. We'll provide them with a small amount of money. If smoke detectors are the problem, we'll give them time. We won't fine them. We'll give them amnesty. So if you could help us get the word out. I'm so happy that Representative Vargas is doing a great job for our city, mentioned housing choice. The lack of adequate housing in the city is a major, major problem, not just here, but actually everywhere on the East Coast. I like to say that NIMBY, not in my backyard, has been replaced by banana. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. Have you heard that one, Representative Vargas? There is no housing project that can be proposed that isn't opposed if it's anywhere near anything else. People come out to oppose it. And the bill proposed by Governor Baker will make it a little bit easier to build housing, but there's much more that we have to do. Our master plan comes up for a vote on November 10th. We've proposed eliminating a small portion of the 2-acre lots that are all around the city. 2-acre lots used to be called snob zoning. No low income or even moderate income person can afford to buy a 2-acre house and live there. The key to making Haverhill affordable and inclusive is to have more inclusive zoning. And that's what we've worked very, very hard on. As you can expect, it's come into opposition. Once again, I need your help. Over the next month, I'm going to be proposing an separate amendment to Haverhill zoning code that would require that for any 10 or more units that are built, that 10% of them be affordable. Along with a shortage of housing, we have the related problem in Haverhill that because there's a shortage, rents are skyrocketing. The average rent in New York City is now lower than the rents in some of the new wonderful and beautiful downtown luxury units here in Haverhill. My daughter wanted to move back here. She moved to Boston because rents were cheaper. We have to do this, or we're going to end up pricing our children and our grandchildren out of the city. So that's what we're working on, and I'll certainly stick around for any questions that anyone might have. Thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll now be moving on to Reverend Kenneth Young.
Unmute, Reverend.
Here we go. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to Katrina Hobbs Everett and the team. It has been a journey and a pleasure to serve as diversity chair for the mayor's task force. If you are able to see anything that happened on yesterday, one of the recommendations that we gave to the city was that we felt that there was a need for a diversity officer. This person would have some type of power to make sure that the city is diversified in every sector, from the contractors to schools to people who are also working in City Hall. The things that we also found was that the hiring practices need to be updated in the sense that there was a very limited amount of persons who were actually hiring people, doing the interviews and hiring people. So that was something else that we saw. We want to continue to meet. There are goals that we want to establish. And so if the city is diversified 5%, we want to set like a 7% goal. So we want to make sure that we set goals so that we'll know where we are as far as what's happening in the city. It has been a pleasure to serve with everyone who's on the committee. I will say, for me being new, I'll be at Calvary for 3 years in December. It has been a journey to meet different people in this capacity and to be able to work for the city and work for the people of Haverhill.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.
So next we'll be moving on to Captain Pistoni.
Hi, good evening, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to take part in this process. I think a lot of you on the diversity committee have been working with Captain Doherty, who's unavailable, so I'm filling in for him, and hopefully I can answer all your questions. So let me start by saying that the Haverhill Police Department, we're keenly aware of the national conversation on police brutality, Black Lives Matter, and we want to use this opportunity not to plead ignorance to what does and can occur, but rather work towards ensuring that it doesn't happen in our community. And one thing, we've taken a look at what steps can we take towards that goal. And a big part of that is training, following nationally accredited policies, and honest dialogue like this tonight, hearing what matters from our citizens and working together with you and our elected officials. Representative Vargas was a great update that he just gave us. And a lot of what's going to happen here is going to depend on what comes out of that reform bill. And regardless of what comes out of that reform bill, we look forward to implementing whatever that may be, so that it serves all well. In a short amount of time during the Black Lives Matters movement, I want to look at some of the positives that have happened here in Haverhill. We had a great peaceful march that was organized by some of our high school students, brought out a large crowd, and it was very peaceful, brought the community together, brought the Haverhill Police Department together. For you, those of you that aren't aware, we began something called Police Youth Dialogues. I see that Carol Island is on, and Dennis Everett. That's probably one of the biggest things I'm the most excited about that's been done thus far. And those of you that aren't aware, the Police Youth Dialogue, again, Carol Island from VIP, Dennis Everett from POSE, brought together our youth from various neighborhoods. And the first session we had, it involved 8 to 10 youth and about 4 of our officers. And they met over the course of 4 or 5 meetings. And, you know, there was an initial icebreaker, and then what evolved out of that was some very, very honest conversations where the youth were able to tell the police exactly how they felt about them, how they felt when they dealt with the police. So it was very eye-opening. And with the help of Carol and Dennis, who I have to say Dennis has a great gift, and being able to moderate and bring the best out in everybody and just have very honest conversations. So over the course of 4 or 5 meetings, the police were able to explain, how they felt, the youth explained how they felt. And what we've seen as a result of that, we've had our officers now out in public. They've actually run into some of these youth. Instead of having these adversarial relationships, they actually have friendly encounters with each other. So we want to build upon this. I really look forward to that. So that was one of the great things that happened. We've taken place in the community forums and the diversity committee. We've also began training in our department with fair and impartial policing, which I'll explain further in the next segment, but that's going to be a benefit to everybody. So through the unfortunate circumstances in the country, we've grown as a community, and we're evolving, and we look forward to working to further improve our community and ourselves as a police department. During my 22 years with Haverhill Police Department, I witnessed vast improvements as far as accountability, the implementation of best practices. This is evidenced by Haverhill Police recently becoming state accredited. We're now working towards national accreditation, which mandates that our agency adhere to national best practices through our department policies. As a result of the recent diversity committee meeting, the Haverhill Police Department, which we participated in, we're very pleased to report that the findings of that were that the Haverhill Police Department use of force policy follows state training standards and is fair, and the department also currently meets 8 of the 8 Can't Wait campaign. So again, we demand officer accountability. We encourage our citizens to file citizen complaints when they feel that they've been mistreated. We've always strive to become a better department, use our mistakes to improve. And lastly, I would say, case in point, I think most of you are aware of an unfortunate incident a year or 2 ago where one of our school resource officers used insensitive language in a mostly non-English speaking class with Latino population. And what grew from that was our command staff, we met with each individual family along with the help of
Thank you, Captain.
I'm sorry?
Your 5 minutes is up, sorry.
All right, but so thank you, appreciate it.
I'm sure there'll be questions and you can definitely elaborate further later on. Thank you. Just wanted to move on to Councilwoman Melinda Barrett.
I will yield my a couple minutes to Captain Pistone, and I can be brief.
Thank you. Thank you,
I'll
Council.
allow one more additional minute, Captain. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. So I just wanted to highlight that, we use that opportunity where, we work with the Latino Coalition, and as a result of that, we met with all these families, and we ended up developing liaison officers between the Haverhill Police Department and the Latino community. And we hope through the help of this committee, if it's the wish, that perhaps we start something where we have a liaison officer with the Black community, who same thing can be a liaison officer, and we can work towards common goals and improve communication. So thank you, Council Barrett, for yielding.
Thank you,
No
Captain.
problem.
Councilwoman.
Thank you, Ms. Collins, for having being the conductor of tonight's event, and thank you, Kat, for having this. And any of the city councilors would have been glad to be here. I just want to say that up front. They're probably sad that they're not here, and I understand time is a factor in this. But the council is not a monolith, and but surprisingly, we have been, in agreement in supporting changes that the city needs to make to be a more inclusive and let our diverse population, come to the forefront. We have supported putting ward counselors on the ballot next year. So it will give more opportunities to a diverse group of people to become leaders of the city. On the governmental side, there are plenty of leaders out there that aren't in government, and it would be nice to see some of them, in the halls of City Hall. We have been also in favor of exploring a school district school committee members. When Rep. Vargas had the ward council forum, the idea of school district representation was even more exciting to the folks there than ward council representation. So we're willing to put that on the ballot too, I believe. We welcome people, if they choose to look at the city charter. We can change our form of government if we feel that, the majority of people feel that it's not quite working the way it should. We all anxiously awaited the diversity committee report that we received last night. And although it is preliminary, it did indicate a road ahead. And we were in unanimous support of hiring the diversity officer recommended by the diversity committee, and not wait till the next fiscal year to do it, but to do it as soon as possible, perhaps in the next month or so. We will do whatever needs to be done, and I will do whatever needs to be done to continue to seek solutions to our racial issues, our inequities, and look for a better city for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Superintendent Margaret Murata-Smith.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me, Yanni. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the time to spend with you. So this afternoon, I received the email from Pat, kind of asking sort of the big overarching question that you'd like me to really think about. And it was a big, juicy question. It said, what shifts have been made in Haverhill Public Schools to address systemic racism? And you have 5 minutes to answer that question. And I thought, wow, that's a big question for 5 minutes. And I thought if I want to be sort of both quick and coherent, I need some sort of an organizational structure to answer the question. So I looked back at some of the things I've read over the years. And one thing that stood out for me was something from the Center for American Progress on Fighting Systemic Racism in K-12 Education. And they list 4 areas to concentrate on if you're a leader, a school leader or a community leader seeking to sort of combat racism in your schools. 1 is advocate for equitable funding because money matters, right? And we know that. 2 is advocate for less policing and more student supports. 3 is advocate for the de facto segregation of schools through sort of boundaries and school lines. And 4 was be aware of what comes ahead of you. So always be thinking forward. So I thought, oh, okay. So I spent a few minutes trying to compare what we've done in Haverhill Public Schools over the last couple of years as a group, as a team, since I've been here against those 4 sort of ideas, those 4 overarching principles of moving a school district forward. And I tried, in the interest of time, to think of 3 things under each of those 4 areas. So I'm going to share those with you now and with the community. So when we talk about money and advocating for funding, the first thing I think we did when I got here was to look at the data and to get our data right in Haverhill. Because our data was not right. Our data was not right in terms of students living in poverty or even sometimes the numbers of students in our community. And that affects everything we do. That affects our title grants, that affects our Chapter 70 funding, that affects everything. We were able to get community eligibility provision, free lunch for all kids in the community because we had the right numbers as we came to look at them. But getting money isn't enough, right? You need to really think about, use your budget to show your message and where you're going. So after we started to get the data right, we looked at the kindergarten and the idea that we were one of the few urban communities across Massachusetts that still had parents paying for kindergarten, a fee for kindergarten. It was $2,500 for full day kindergarten for our students. So that was something we did right away, was bring in free full day kindergarten for kids. And that brought us additional money too, because when kids are half day in kindergarten, they get half the state funding for kindergarten. So this year we got an additional $1.9 million in funding for those kids going full day. And it's great for kids. And it's good for families to have their students in full day kindergarten. So we did that as well. Another thing we did in our budget was to eliminate sports fees, academic fees, all things that we can for all kids, because we don't want kids not to be able to join a team or a committee or an activity because of the fees. So we eliminated sports fees. We eliminated fees at the high school for a variety of things. So those are some of the things we did in terms of funding. Oh, another thing that we did in terms, oh, am I done already? Okay, I'll go real quick. I'll speed talk. In terms of advocating for less policing, we've doubled the number of school adjustment counselors in our schools. We've created relationships with mental health agencies in our school district. And we've added mental health supports across the board and improved our relationships with the police to assure that our kids are safe in school, because we do have SROs and we want our kids to be safe, but we want those SROs to be supportive and helpful to our students. Finally, in ending segregation, we had the right sizing initiative where we lowered class sizes for many of our urban areas, which were up in the 40s, while our suburban areas were in the 20s. And even those class sizes out so that all kids have a more equitable education. We've increased early college enrollment and diversity in enrollment. We have twice as many kids entering early college this year as we did in the past. And many, many, many more of those kids, I have the number. We went from 13 kids of color in early college in 18-19 to 63 kids of color enrolled in our early college program this year.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll have the Human Resources Coordinator for Haverhill Public Schools, Sandra MacArthur.
I thank you for inviting me tonight. This is very important work, and I'm so proud to be part of it. Kat had sent us some thoughts from the community, and I thought I would share an overview of our schools and tell you a little bit what we're doing from the HR perspective. You know, when Dr. Murata came to us in July of 2018, she immediately made it known that recruiting a diverse workforce was one of her top priorities. In Margaret's interview for this position back in March of 2018, when asked about diverse urban community that we live in and staffing, her response was, "It is immensely important that our school community reflect our students." And that hit home for a lot of people. I have to say, I don't think those words were ever spoken prior to her arrival in this district. I have now worked with her in my new position for just over a year, and I can say it is one of her top priorities. It all begins with awareness. Awareness is the foundation of this entire effort. Awareness not just of my HR team, but with every staff member who is in charge of hiring and who participates in the interviewing process. I would like to also mention that just over a year ago in August of 2019, at the request of Mr. Wood, and with the full approval and support of the Haverhill School Committee, the Haverhill Public Schools a year ago, August 2019, started the Haverhill Public Schools Diversity Committee. It was created, and what an incredible team they are. The reality is, in our world, recruiters everywhere in all fields are put to the task of increasing the diversity in the workplace in both the public and the private sector. Everyone is talking about it, and everybody has really good intentions, but we have to ask ourselves, are we really moving the needle? So under Margaret's leadership, what are the issues that we looked at? You know, is it because the pool of candidates, they're not there for us to have the opportunity to bring them to our school community, to have the right people reflecting our student, reflect our student body? Or is it because there are the staff that are doing the interviewing, they're not just digging deep enough to see the opportunities in front of us? We had some honest communications, honest conversations, and a lot of reflection. And we have seen a slight shift in the last 2 years. I want to give you just some information so you have it going into this. You know, we have about 1,700 employees. 1,100 of those employees are reported to the Department of Education. The 1,100 employees are our professional staff, the administrators, teachers, guidance counselors. That does not include our cafeteria workers, our custodians, our substitutes. One of the important items that we report annually is race and ethnicity. And it is optional. The employee does not have to fill in those blanks for us. So we are so grateful for those who communicate it for us, to us. I want to give you one of the examples of the demographics reported in ethnicity is Hispanic and Latino reporting. For years, the Haverhill Public Schools has been in the 30s. Out of 1,100 people or so in the system that we report, we've been about in the 30s. Since Margaret took over and reporting through June of 2020, in 2 years, we have moved from the mid-30s to 62 staff members, professional staff members reporting the ethnicity as Hispanic or Latino. That's a great number. Let's look at hiring since September 1st. It's been a great year for us. We've had about 130 or so staff members hired this year. 37 have been minorities, and these are in professional positions, to about 28%. We have 1 American Indian, 5 Asian, 5 Black or African American. That's how it's coded under DESE. We have 2 Black or African American and Hispanic or Latino, and 22 Hispanic or Latinos hired. So there is a lot of work to do, but we are moving the needle. We do have some big goals in mind. I know Mr. Burns and Ms. Dion at the high school are looking at the early college program and an education path that is offered, because we want to start growing our own, our students to paraprofessionals, our paraprofessionals to teachers. What can we do for our paraprofessionals, our ESPs? Do they dream of becoming an educator? What can we do to help move them forward? So we're very excited about that. We're looking at retaining those who we hired. We're putting so much time and effort into recruiting people. Are we doing the right things to retain them? We're looking at bringing in more PD for our hiring teams. We want to make sure we educate our leadership. Where do the unconscious biases appear during the recruitment and hiring process? Our goal is to identify and remove potential biases in the screening and sourcing of candidates. It is critical to us that we ensure fairness and transparency. That's part of every single process. So we are also looking at revising and modifying our website and our database. SchoolSpring is what we use for recruiting. 1 minute. 1 minute. Okay, good. For recruiting, because we want to make sure that they are culturally sensitive and they're accessible to all targeted groups. And finally, I just want to say we are absolutely positively over the moon with the Haverhill City Councilors approving last night the diversity officer for both the city and the school department. Dr. Murata has been talking about this and making this addition for some time. So we so appreciate the mayor and the city councilors for supporting this effort, and I hope supporting the funding for this position. And we are just eternally grateful. So thank you very much for this opportunity to be with you tonight.
Thank you very much. Finally, we're going to have the Director of Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, Diane Conley.
And you're on mute, Diane.
Good evening, everyone, and I'd like to thank everyone for having me. It is truly a privilege to be here. I was born and raised in Haverhill. In 1968, I entered Kroll School as a first grader, and my principal was a woman of color, Dorothy Diggs. I hold her in high esteem, and I wanted to be like Mrs. Diggs. And I wanted to be like Mrs. Diggs, not because of the color of her skin, but because she ruled the school, she ruled the lunchroom, and she ruled the playground. And I wanted to be the boss, just like Mrs. Diggs. So here we are many years later. And I chose to raise my 3 children here and to have them go through the Haverhill public school system. And as adults, I will say the one thing that they all share in common is compassion for others. And I really credit that to the diversity and commitment of the city of Haverhill and the Haverhill School Department. So thank you. I would like to echo Mrs. MacArthur's sentiments regarding Dr. Murata. Dr. Murata came to Haverhill School with a vision of equity for all learners. It's a phrase you will often hear her say, all learners. And she means that for what it's worth. Everyone, no matter what. This equity includes expanding our knowledge and understanding what culturally proficient district looks like. And not only does she not talk about it, she shows us what it looks like. And she does this by, one, establishing the diversity committee that Mrs. MacArthur talked about. And that committee set 4 goals or 4 focus areas that we wanted to work on: professional development, hiring and recruitment, retention, and accountability. Under professional development, there are 3 schools in Haverhill who are currently involved in the DESE's Culturally Responsive Teaching Academy to teach the teachers how to implement those kinds of strategies. We have also been working with Confienza. We are working with our coaches. We have coaches in every building, and Confienza is based around equity, language, and literacy for our English language learners and beyond. We have bilingual parent liaisons in every building. So communication should be equitable for all. And we have translation services available for those who speak language other than Spanish. We continue to have a partnership with 1647, which is a connecting family in schools. They train and support educators to implement strategies to build academic partnerships with all families. Under Dr. Murata's tutelage, we sent several teams of staff and teachers to be part of the Essex County learning community, along with some other North Shore communities. And the focus of that 2-year work was tiered supports, tiered instruction, social emotional learning, and cultural proficiency. Please notice the thread or the theme in all of this work is cultural proficiency and cultural diversity. We have a great partnership with Merrimack College in that we hire their Merrimack Fellows, many of which are studying English language learners. We've had a great partnership and it's getting even stronger with our connection with Kat over there. And they have a Merrimack Institute for New Teachers support, which we have included in our mentoring and induction program. And I will tell you that this has been a tremendous resource. The October Mint workshop, if you don't mind my reading off of this, The Merrimack was a safe zone project. It was a comprehensive training curriculum used across the campus nationwide to provide opportunities for people to discuss and explore topics around gender and sexuality in a non-judgmental and environmental education environment. So I'm going to stop there so I don't get cut off. But please know that this team, and I mean it, a team from the school district to the elected officials to the police department to the community, I have never felt a more collaborative culture than I have in the last 2 years. And I want to thank you all for being a part of it and for welcoming everyone's ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we'll be fielding questions from the group chat. All those in the group, please feel free to write your questions in the group chat related to the topic at hand, and I will relay them to the panelists. I do have one question pending here. It says, how does the effort the current president has made to condemn and disallow diversity trainings in government affect the Haverhill Police Department? I'll allow 2 minutes to answer that. Yeah, that should be adequate, 2 minutes.
Could you, sorry, I was having a problem here. Could you repeat that, please?
Sure. How does the effort the current president has made to condemn and disallow diversity trainings in government affect the Haverhill Police Department?
Well, I would say his efforts to condemn diversity, we absolutely would not condemn diversity training. We would welcome diversity training. One of the things that we just began was fair and impartial policing training, which has to do with implicit bias. And the big thing that came out of that was that the realization that we all are implicitly biased. So right now what we have going on is we have supervisors and officers that are going to training to become trained trainers. And over the course of the next few months, they're going to come back and train all of our officers in implicit bias training. So we fully embrace any kind of diversity training. If that answers your question.
Thank you. I have another question in the chat. How does the school administration solicit feedback on its programs from families and students? I'll allow 2 minutes for that answer.
Dr. Murata, shall I speak?
You can start with the Title I information. Sure, that'd be great. Thanks.
That's exactly what you read my mind. Haverhill Public Schools is a Title I district. That means we receive federal and state money based on our population. There are very specific requirements for that Title I grant. And part of it is parent engagement and parent feedback and monitoring that. We host parent and guardian family information sessions, and we welcome and encourage feedback on programs through surveys, through social media, through the school system. So again, parent feedback and engagement is a critical and mandatory part of Title I funding.
Also, I would say that certainly as the kids get older, we want the student to have voice. I think Mr. Burns is to be recognized as the high school principal as really having done a lot to give voice and to support the voice of students at our high school through both the student council there and just meetings with students in general. They have routine forums. Now they're mainly online. You know, where I've attended, where Mr. Burns attends, where he brings their questions to our leadership team and lets people know, whether it's the facilities director or myself or curriculum director, what the students' concerns are, what their questions are. He invites them to the meetings. as well, the adults to the student meetings, so that we can have that two-way sort of a conversation. Because we're aware that the students and the families, they're our customers, right? If we're a business, those are our customers. And we want to be sure that we're meeting their needs. And we know that it's sort of a continual evolving process, and we're just seeking to get better at it every day.
Thank you. So someone else in the chat said training is important, but 1 or 2 sessions are often not enough to unravel the social messages that are so embedded in our attitudes. How might you address that? And that is directed to the police and to Murata, please.
Okay, as far as the police department goes, I agree with that. So we're constantly training. You know, we have in-service training throughout the year, which is mandated by the state. They set the agenda. However, we as a police department, we go above and beyond what's mandated by the state. And we have what's called specialized training on an ongoing basis, especially as things come up. We recently had a event where we had a member of our LGBTQ community who didn't feel supported, and they filed a complaint. And what resulted from that was the entire department underwent training and sensitivity training. So I agree, 1 or 2 sessions is not enough, and it requires ongoing training.
Yeah, I would agree as well, right? Training is important. We need to have training. We need to have tools. We need to learn more. But then it's, what do you do with that training? How does it impact your day-to-day being? And I think for me, particularly around, racism and even microaggressions that occur in our schools, I think it's important that when you see something, say something. Many times in the past, I had seen something would occur, and a teacher would be, wouldn't want to address the other teacher in the moment. They'd want to talk about it later. But the student walked away having seen the adults kind of be complicit by not addressing it and not having the conversation in front of the student. So I'm a firm believer that if somebody says something that is offensive or concerning, you have to say something in the moment. And you have to say it in a polite and respectful manner, but you have to intervene when it's said. And I practice that with my staff, and I encourage my staff to practice that with each other. We all have implicit bias, but we have to be aware that these are children in front of us, and they're developing, and they're becoming adults, and we're shaping their lives. And we have to be very careful what we say. And if sometime we say the wrong thing, then somebody needs to call us out and let us know.
Great, thank you. Another question. At the student-led Black Lives Matter protest, there was an abundance of young people present. To all the panelists, how would you continue to foster this in the school system and also in a relationship with the police?
This is Andy. One of the things that I think we do over at high school is that we encourage the students to be civically engaged, whether it's through the VIP program, doing our leadership things in the schools. Right now things are a little bit difficult because of COVID, but we're trying to get together the kids and interacting with the police department, doing the youth police dialogues along with the police department and other agencies in the city, and keeping them engaged and keeping them motivated, I think, is the key, because we can lose that momentum in this whole thing that's going on. But that's at least what we're doing in my corner of the world in the high school, to keep them motivated and engaged.
I'd like to say that the school system is continuing sort of that message, and through the curriculum, through culturally responsive literature, having our libraries up to date, and resources that reflect our community. So I would like to think that that is a priority, and I'm seeing that happen in some of the literature that we're exposing children to, and starting to have those conversations. So I'd like to think that through the school department, it's going to go through education, discussion, literature, and the resources that we choose.
This is Bob Castoni, Police Department. To Andy Polanco's point, again, I encourage anybody that's not familiar with the great work that was done with the recent youth police dialogues with Andy Polanco, Carol Island, Dennis Everett. First I've ever seen of something like that, and it was the most impactful. It was real conversations. It was not window dressing. We want to continue to build upon those, and those are the type of real conversations where the youth were able to, without fear of retaliation or however they may feel, they were able to say how they, Dennis Everett made a great point at the beginning of these meetings. He said, listen and let these people's truth be their truth. In other words, don't be defensive. You may not believe what they're saying, but let their truth be the truth. And it was very true. It was very impactful. So I hope that those continue, along with the work of school resource officers in the school, not being seen as police, but as mentors and resources to help the youth to grow.
I would just add to that very quickly. The 2018 civics education bill that we passed both has civics education mandated at the 8th grade level, but then also requires every single high school student to have the opportunity to do a civics project and get course credit for it. So every single student at Haverhill High can have the opportunity to engage civically and take on a project in the community and actually get credit for that. That is the intent of the law, and we're following sort of the implementation of that right now. And so civics offers an incredible opportunity to both stay in line with sort of your curriculum and your academics, but also empowering the next generation of young leaders to step into their power.
Thank you all. I just want to remind everyone that we do have 7 minutes left for this meeting, so thank you for your time. I do see some questions in the chat that may have already been addressed, so I'll move on to the next one. For the superintendent, do you have any data that the public can see that supports the decreased rate of suspension for students of color?
Yes. So that's data that's available. I always have to check. I always think I'm on mute. That's data that's available on the Department of Education website. I don't have that data in front of me, but I was actually just looking at it this week for something else. The number of suspensions across the school system for all students, including students of color, are on the decrease, and as well as the number of restraints used on students have significantly decreased over the last 3 years. And that's data that's very publicly available. If you go to www.doe.mass.edu, you go to the section that says students, and then you click on discipline, and there's just loads of information there going back 10, 12 years, and you can see it all.
Great, thank you. Can you actually repeat the website one more time?
It's the Department of Education website, so it's www.doe.mass.edu, and I can put it in the chat.
That's awesome, thank you. Okay, last couple questions. For the police / the schools, is there any funding to address these specific issues that are coming from the city?
Do you want me to address that? I'm not sure I understand the question, but I guess the answer is yes. We've provided some significant funding to groups like Jesus Ruiz's group, the Leaving the Streets Ministry, who's done a fantastic job of reaching out in the community to kids who are in gangs, finding them jobs. The last time I checked, Jesus had found jobs for something like 130 kids. He gets in his car, he finds them playing ball or wherever they are. We've also provided significant funding for UTech in order to work with gang-related kids and find them jobs. get them out of gangs and get them into a more productive life. And I certainly welcome any thoughts or suggestions anybody has on how we can allocate our resources. So I think the answer is yes, Dennis, if I understood the question okay.
Yeah, and I think you're on mute.
So my question is specifically, is there funding from the city going directly to the police in the schools to do this work?
To do what work, Dennis? To work with kids?
No, the race work that we're, so diversity, inclusion, and equity work. Is there anything that's coming from the city funding these institutions? Because from what I'm hearing, there's a lot of responsibility on these two institutions to do a lot of other things. And if we're gonna see some stuff here as a citizen, not as Pose, I'm speaking as a father, is there money being allocated so they can directly do that?
Again, I'm not sure if I understand the question, but you mean other than the money that goes to UTEC and the Leaving the Streets ministry and the schools, the police have an $8 million budget. We do provide a social worker that goes out with people that have a drug addiction problem. I think I'm not really sure specifically what you're asking, but give me a call afterwards, and if you have some specific ideas on better ways to allocate our resources, I'd love to chat with you.
Will do, Mayor. Thank you.
You were on our gang task force. You did a great job, Dennis.
Thank you, sir.
I actually have a couple questions, sorry. So whatever happened to the local independent commission that was to review the police misconduct? Has that been formed? How is that going?
Is that for me or for the state?
To whomever can answer the question, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we're still pondering whether we should have a local group to review police misconduct. I don't see the type of police misconduct here, by the way, that you see in other cities. The police chief is very, very strict with police officers. And in my time of mayor, I have never had a single incident reported to me of racially motivated police misconduct. I know there's some talk at the state level of creating the opportunity for cities to have civilian review boards. Andy, is that in the legislation that's gone through the House and the Senate?
So cities can do that right now without the legislation that we're working on right now. Boston has one, for example.
And we'll definitely take a look at that. Thanks.
Okay. Did anyone else want to add on to that question? No? Last question for the evening. Thank you guys for hanging in there. This is directed toward the mayor and Reverend Young. What has been accomplished by the Equity Task Force, and has there been any goals that have been set for the near future or long-term goals, etc.?
I'll defer to Reverend Young, and I'll go after that. Reverend Young.
Well, we are definitely have a working document, and I think one of the things that we've already can put a star by is the fact that we've presented to the council. They all agreed for a chief diversity officer. That's one thing. We're looking at goals on diversity throughout the city. We're going to drill down into policing in the city of Haverhill. We did have conversations over the way policing is taking place in Haverhill, but we needed more time. Initially, it was set for us just to look at the use of force policy, but we know that it's more to policing than just the use of force policy. So that's what we're working on, and hopefully we can start as soon as the mayor gives us a thumbs up.
Well, I'll give that to you right now. We're committed to continuing to work with the diversity committee, with our schools and with our police, and to continue our hiring practices to make this a more diverse city. What I want is when somebody goes into City Hall, the only thing the mayor can control, by the way, I don't control the schools, but when somebody goes into City Hall, that they see a City Hall that reflects the community. We've made progress there, but there's more to do. In my tenure of mayor, we've tripled the percentage of Latinx, Latinos and Latinas who work in City Hall. But we're not there yet. We have more to do. With the African-American community, we have to make more progress. We've had a very slight increase in the percentage of our workforce that's African-American, but we have more to do. I've made a real effort over the past few years to put minorities, Latinos on the various boards and commissions we have, but there's more work to do. And I think some of the background information that we got from the diversity committee, they did a fantastic job, was pointing us in the direction of where we need to go to become a more diverse city. I think the ultimate goal, in my opinion, is to have ward-based city councilors. I felt it should have gone on the ballot this year. I was very outspoken about that it should have been on the presidential ballot. Unfortunately, I wasn't successful in getting it on the ballot, but I'm going to renew those efforts next year. I feel if there's ward-based city councilors, then everyone in every section of the city is going to know who they can call if they have a problem with City Hall. So we'll keep working on it.
With that, I just want to thank the panelists and all those who have tuned in and asked questions. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to turn this back over to Kat Everett.
Thank you, Yanni, and thank you everyone for joining us. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, Yanni, and thank you everybody for joining us. I want to just let people know that from this meeting, we're going to be going ahead and continuing to launch the subcommittees. And so for those of you that are doing this work from all the institutions, know that there are community members who have been signing up, looking to try to help with any efforts that are going on in the city. And so anyone who might be watching this live, please make sure you get in touch with myself or with Anna Pierce. Anna, thank you so much for all your work. Yeah, please wave so people know who you are. Thank you so much for all your work putting this together. Yanni, thank you so much for moderating. You did a fantastic job. And I just want to encourage people in the community to continue to get involved. Nothing changes overnight, and we need the community support. That's where all of the power really lies. And so please sign up for the subcommittees so we can continue to move this work forward. And thank you all so much. Have a great night. Make sure you vote.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.